We all thought Carlos Alcaraz withdrew from the Madrid Open simply because his body was breaking down. But details of a private backstage dynamic between him and Jannik Sinner have just surfaced, and it shatters everything the media wants you to believe about their friendly rivalry. This is no longer just a story about a painful right wrist. This is about power, dominance, and a brutal shift in the tennis landscape. Jannik Sinner is currently climbing to the absolute peak of the sport just as Carlos Alcaraz is physically collapsing. The timing of this shift is not a coincidence. It feels like a calculated takeover. Fans see the bright smiles on television. They see the respectful handshakes at the net. They naturally believe the wholesome narrative. But the reality inside the player lounges is entirely different. The professional tennis tour is a ruthless, unforgiving environment. When one player shows a moment of weakness, the others immediately move in to exploit it. Carlos is bleeding confidence rapidly right now. His body is failing him at the absolute worst possible time. The physical breakdown has been systematic and deeply alarming to watch. First, he was forced out of the Monte Carlo Masters. Then he missed the Barcelona Open. Now, he is completely missing the Madrid Open, his beloved home tournament. He even had to wear a medical cast at the Laureus Awards ceremony recently. The optics of that moment were terrible for his image as an invincible prodigy. But what makes this situation infinitely worse is the heavy, silent pressure radiating from the Sinner camp. Jannik Sinner recently defeated him in Monte Carlo. Sinner captured the #1 ranking. Sinner looks incredibly healthy, entirely invincible, and he is watching his biggest rival break down piece by piece. The contrast is staggering. One player is accelerating toward history, while the other is trapped in a frustrating cycle of rehabilitation and doubt. To understand what is really destroying Carlos from the inside, we have to look closely at what Jannik Sinner is doing behind closed doors. If you listen to the official press conferences, the narrative is perfectly scripted. Juan Carlos Ferrero points to a forearm issue, and Sinner politely wishes his rival a speedy recovery. It is textbook public relations. The sport desperately needs you to believe these two young stars are best friends pushing each other to greatness. That specific narrative sells millions of dollars in global sponsorships. It fills massive stadiums in Paris, Rome, and New York. So, the media management teams work overtime to protect that lucrative image. Ferrero steps in front of the global microphones and calmly explains the medical situation. He uses very careful, measured words. He calls the injury a minor, temporary setback. He talks extensively about recovery timelines, rest, and advanced physical therapy. Meanwhile, Jannik Sinner gives the safest, most diplomatic answers possible whenever reporters ask him about the absence of Carlos. Sinner says he hopes Carlos gets well soon. He says the entire tour needs Carlos to be healthy. It sounds wonderful to the casual fan. It sounds completely noble. But it is a heavily polished illusion designed to hide the brutal, cutthroat truth of elite professional tennis. The public relations machine is operating at maximum capacity right now, just to prevent a total panic among the fans and sponsors. But the panic is already heavily present inside the Alcaraz camp. You can easily see it in the tense, rigid posture of the entire coaching staff. You can read it loud and clear in the vague, delayed medical updates that keep extending his time away from the court. They are actively hiding the true, terrifying severity of the situation. Admitting the absolute truth would give Sinner an even bigger, perhaps insurmountable, psychological advantage. The gap between them is widening every single day. While Carlos sits in sterile medical waiting rooms dealing with inflamed tendons, Jannik is lifting prestigious trophies and solidifying his absolute control over the ranking system. The television cameras never follow them into the private, restricted areas of the stadiums. What actually happens when the microphones are finally turned off is a completely different and much darker story. The tension is reaching a critical, explosive level behind the scenes, and you need to see exactly how this locker room war will dictate the future of tennis. So make sure you are subscribed to track every single development of this escalating crisis. Whispers from inside the tour reveal a shifting power dynamic that is terrifying the Alcaraz camp. It was not a screaming match. It was the chilling reality of Jannik Sinner and his physical dominance becoming a psychological weapon. The true leak from the locker room is about presence, silence, and deeply intimidating body language. When Jannik walks down the corridors of these massive stadiums in Europe, he exudes an aura of absolute invincibility. He does not limp. He does not wear heavy medical tape. He does not surround himself with a frantic team of physical therapists. He looks like a flawless machine built for endless hours of brutal tennis matches. Then you look at the current state of Carlos Alcaraz. Carlos is constantly monitored and closely guarded by his team. His right arm is treated like a fragile, highly classified secret. The dynamic between these two generational talents is no longer equal. During the brief moments they cross paths behind the scenes, the silence is deafening and heavy. Sinner knows Carlos is hurting right now. Carlos knows that Sinner sees his vulnerability. That unspoken truth is a heavy weight crushing the competitive spirit of the young Spanish star. This is the exact psychological warfare that the mainstream sports media completely refuses to broadcast. We must look at the recent sequence of devastating events to truly grasp the magnitude of this crisis. Carlos suffered a brutal, exhausting defeat to Jannik on the clay courts of Monte Carlo. The physical toll of that specific match immediately forced him out of the Barcelona Open just days later. Now the Madrid Open, his absolute favorite environment and his home fortress, is happening without him on the court. The Madrid Open is not just another tournament for Carlos. It is his home, his kingdom, and his greatest source of energy. The Spanish crowd demands his presence. They expect him to dominate the clay just like Rafael Nadal did for decades. Missing this specific event is a devastating blow to his pride and his global brand. This is a catastrophic chain reaction for his season. The intense physical pain radiating from his wrist is clearly bad, but the mental damage being inflicted week after week is infinitely worse. Every single time Carlos withdraws from a major draw, Jannik advances deeper into the tournament. Every single event Carlos misses, Jannik wins more crucial matches and claims more territorial dominance over the tour. The dynamic is actively breaking Carlos psychologically. He plays a spectacular brand of tennis that requires absolute, unwavering belief in his physical durability. He needs to chase down impossible balls in the corners of the court. He needs to whip his heavy topspin forehand with maximum violence and speed. If his wrist is compromised even slightly, his entire identity on the tennis court is instantly destroyed. Sinner plays a completely different game. Sinner is highly calculated, brutally efficient, and relentlessly consistent under pressure. Sinner does not need to perform acrobatic miracles or dive on the clay to win matches. He just stands on the baseline and suffocates his opponents with pure, rhythmic power. This stark contrast in durability is the core of the current drama. Sinner is currently a fortress made of solid stone. Carlos is a spectacular, explosive firework that is rapidly running out of gunpowder. And the most terrifying part? Sinner knows exactly what he is doing. And this silent warning was not just meant for Carlos alone. This is where the narrative flips completely upside down. Jannik Sinner is not just trying to beat Alcaraz on the court. He is establishing a permanent psychological empire. He is proving that while Carlos breaks down under the physical stress, he remains totally unbreakable. This leaked backstage tension reveals a much grander, far more sinister strategy. Jannik is directly using the physical vulnerability of Carlos to send a chilling, undeniable message to the entire locker room. When Sinner dominates these massive clay court tournaments without his main rival present to challenge him, he is not just winning heavy trophies. He is planting deep seeds of doubt in the minds of Alexander Zverev, Daniil Medvedev, and every other top-tier player on the planet. Other players are quietly whispering in the locker room right now. They see Jannik practicing for 4 hours a day without breaking a sweat, while Carlos is locked inside private treatment rooms receiving intensive therapy. The intimidation factor is officially off the charts. The rest of the tour is slowly realizing that Jannik might be the true, undisputed heir to the throne. The underlying message is simple, cold, and cruel. The message is that the new era of professional tennis belongs exclusively to Jannik. Sinner wants the rest of the tour to closely watch the fragile state of Carlos and quickly realize that nobody can survive the grueling marathon of the modern circuit except him. Carlos is simply the most famous, highest-profile casualty in this brutal war of physical attrition. Do you guys actually believe Jannik Sinner is intentionally using this exact moment of weakness to permanently destroy the confidence of Carlos Alcaraz? Drop your honest opinions in the comments right now, because the entire tennis world is heavily divided on this massive shift in power. We need to deeply analyze how this specific power play forces Carlos into a desperate, suffocating corner. Carlos is no longer just fighting the severe inflammation in his right arm. He is fighting the rapidly expanding, dark shadow of Sinner. The psychological pressure to return to the court before he is fully healed is absolutely immense and highly dangerous. If Carlos stays away too long to rest his wrist, the empire of Sinner becomes an undeniable reality. If Carlos returns too early, re-injures the arm, and loses to Jannik again, his magical aura of greatness might completely vanish forever. The tactical brilliance of Sinner is that he never has to say a single arrogant word to the sports media. He lets his flawless attendance record, his lethal backhand, and his immaculate physical condition do all the heavy talking. He forces Carlos to watch the tour move forward from the sidelines. He forces Juan Carlos Ferrero to desperately search for medical miracles in private clinics. The power dynamic has entirely flipped in a matter of mere months. 2 years ago, Carlos was the ultimate apex predator of the sport. He was hunting down legends and violently taking their crowns. Now, he is the wounded prey trying to hide his severe injuries from a relentless, cold-blooded hunter who never seems to miss a target. The situation is escalating far faster than anyone inside the tennis community predicted. With Sinner playing mind games at the absolute highest level, the pressure inside the team has officially reached a boiling point. Inside the Alcaraz camp, Juan Carlos Ferrero is facing a terrifying reality check. The realization is hitting them extremely hard right now. The explosive playing style of Carlos is literally eating his body alive, while his biggest rival does not even sweat. Ferrero is a brilliant tennis mind, but he is currently dealing with the most difficult puzzle of his entire coaching career. He built Carlos into a spectacular, high-flying weapon. He taught him to hit every single forehand with maximum rotational violence to overwhelm his opponents. That aggressive strategy won historic Grand Slam titles and instantly captured the hearts of millions of fans around the globe. But now, Ferrero is staring directly at the devastating physical cost of that exact strategy. The brutal truth is finally catching up to them in the worst possible way. The human body is simply not designed to withstand that level of sheer torque on the wrist and forearm week after week on the demanding professional circuit. Ferrero watches Jannik slide smoothly on the clay, constantly conserving energy and protecting his joints. Sinner moves like water across the court, but Carlos moves like a violent, unpredictable earthquake. That earthquake is now tearing his own physical foundation apart from the inside. The panic inside the locker room is completely palpable. They are trapped in a vicious, unforgiving cycle. If Ferrero tells Carlos to dial back the incredible power and play a safer brand of tennis, Carlos immediately loses his ultimate competitive superpower. He loses the magical intimidation factor that makes him truly unstoppable. If they keep pushing the pedal to the floor, the wrist might snap completely and ruin his entire career. This is no longer just a standard physical rehabilitation phase. It has rapidly evolved into a massive crisis of confidence for the young Spaniard. Carlos is sitting at home in Spain, watching Sinner absolutely dominate the European clay season, and deeply doubting his own future in the sport. He is seriously questioning if his body can actually survive the brutal marathon of a long professional career. The physical medical cast on his right wrist will eventually come off, but the deep psychological scars from this brutal stretch of the season might be entirely permanent. Everything now hinges entirely on Roland Garros. Paris is no longer just another major Grand Slam tournament for Carlos Alcaraz. It has suddenly become a desperate, do-or-die fight for absolute survival in the terrifying new era of Jannik Sinner. The heavy red clay of Paris was supposed to be the undisputed kingdom of Carlos for the next decade. He was publicly crowned as the natural successor to Rafael Nadal by the entire Spanish media. But Sinner is threatening to storm those majestic gates and burn the kingdom to the ground. The ultimate question hovering over the entire tennis world right now is incredibly heavy and unavoidable. Will Carlos recover his health and find a miraculous way to reclaim his lost throne? Or is this chronic wrist injury the tragic beginning of an early, painful downfall? He faces an impossible, career-defining choice in the coming weeks before the tournament begins. He must completely reinvent his entire tactical approach to protect his fragile body, or he risks burning out completely before he even reaches his athletic prime. Jannik Sinner clearly won this brutal psychological battle during the spring events. He used his perfect health, his lethal baseline game, and his relentless consistency to completely shatter the invincible aura of the Spanish prodigy. Sinner proved that availability is the most important ability on the tour. But the definitive war for the future of the sport is only just beginning. The stakes at Roland Garros have never been this incredibly high for any young player in modern tennis history. A best-of-5 set match on heavy clay is the ultimate physical torture chamber. If the wrist of Carlos is not fully healed, the grueling conditions in Paris will expose him instantly. Is this the harsh wake-up call that finally forces Carlos to evolve into a smarter, more durable champion? Or will Jannik Sinner ultimately destroy his dreams on the biggest stage in the world? Let me know who you truly believe holds the ultimate power right now in this brutal rivalry. And you absolutely must hit subscribe right now, because you do not want to miss the shocking truth we uncover next, as this historic war explodes.